Alright guys, welcome on to Formula 1 News. Lando Norris has emphatically declared Max Verstappen as the heavy favourite for this year's Drivers' Championship, not just because he has a sizeable lead from a points perspective, but also there are plenty of other reasons as well. We've seen it in history past where we have Drivers' World Championship battles going down to the wire and crashes between those two contenders always favour the guy in the lead. Could this be what Lando's implying as well? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. First of all, we have 6 rounds remaining. We have 3 sprint races still to go. These, if Lando wants to win this championship, will likely prove critical because he's going to need to make up ground on Max in the sprint as well. We know that as it stands, Lando can win every race, every sprint, and if Max is second, then Max still wins the championship, but that would be very marginal at that point. So Lando, if he were to win a sprint and Max is like P4, P5, that's a handful of points that go the other way. The races are still the most important. Like, Lando can win all 3 sprints and Max can DNF from all 3 sprints, and Lando only closes the gap by 24 points. But to be fair, if that was to happen, then a 30 or what would it be, a 28 point or so gap would be much more attainable than it presently seems. The 3 sprints, of course, in Austin this weekend, then in Brazil in a couple of weekends' time, and then Qatar at the end of November, of course, a race that was controversial, to say the very least, last year, because the heat was immense this year. It's later in the calendar, should be cooler to some degree. It's still going to be a challenging race, I'm sure, but yeah, important sprint rounds coming up shortly. Couple of things on the driver market. Lawson is back in Formula 1, replacing Daniel Ricciardo, and we know that Red Bull are putting him head-to-head with Yuki Tsunoda. Helmut Marko's made it very clear. Well, Marko's made that clear. Whether Christian Horner feels the same way is another question. Marko literally said the other day, we talked about it in a video, that he expects Max Verstappen's teammate next year to be a junior driver, formerly at RB, probably Tsunoda or Lawson. I don't know whether Horner believes that himself, and I wouldn't be surprised if in a day or so Horner comes out and says, well, yeah, Checo's our driver. But Lawson will need to try his absolute best against Tsunoda for the rest of the season, but he does say it's going to be a challenging return, right, for the Austin Grand Prix. We'll see how he gets on, but obviously Lawson is expected, if he wants to get Perez's drive, to beat Tsunoda, and possibly to beat Tsunoda reasonably comfortably. If he doesn't, and it's going to be a tall order to do so, because Yuki's been at the team the entire year, and for last year as well, and for the last few years, then either none of them get the drive, Perez keeps it, there are some questions. Another interesting development on the Audi-owned Sauber team in terms of what their driver lineup is going to be. The favourite right now, alongside Nico Hülkenberg, is of course Valtteri Bottas. That probably makes the most sense. But there is a good argument to say, Franco Colapinto, should he join the team? We know that he's on Williams right now. He's not getting a Williams drive next year because they have Sainz coming in. They would like Colapinto to go to Audi. But Audi, Sauber, would also be interested apparently in Mick Schumacher, and Schumacher's back in the frame. It's difficult for Mick, right, because he always gets thrown into these conversations, and I feel like he's just never going to be able to get a drive again. Like, Toto Wolff will speak so highly of Mick, but yet when he has the chance to put him into his car when Hamilton leaves, you know, he's not going to do so. He's going to put his other guy in Kimi Antonelli, right? So Mick is clearly a talented driver. Maybe not quite good enough to get right back to the top level of Formula 1. Of course, he had the time at Haas. He did well at Haas with respect to teammates that just weren't especially good. But of course, there is the German factor as well. I mean, on paper, it makes a lot of sense for Audi to try and form a German lineup. When we first heard that Audi were coming into the sport, the theory was, they even said it publicly. They said, oh, Mercedes, yeah, German team, yeah, right. You know, those guys obviously largely UK-based organisation with British drivers, an Austrian team principal, so Mercedes aren't really German in Formula 1. Audi are intending to be, and Audi literally said, yeah, we're going to be a real German team winning for Germany. Now, right now, it doesn't look like they're going to be able to win immediately. Even Mattia Binotto, who's running the show over there now, basically says their engine is not that good with respect to their competition, at least as it currently stands. But to have a double German driver lineup in Hülkenberg and Schumacher could be pretty interesting for those guys. But obviously, that would make sense really when they officially become Audi. They're not Audi for another year or so. So I still feel like this development seems rather unlikely. A couple of things on Antonelli. He is getting that Mercedes drive for next year. He actually mentioned that a test that he did at Spa, that was the key to convincing Mercedes that he had overcome basically some weaknesses they saw in him and he was ready for a seat. Of course, then they gave him the practice run in Monza, and that didn't end especially according to plan. He puts it in the wall, but they confirm him in the team shortly afterwards. George Russell as well is expecting Antonelli to give him a serious challenge next year, and understandably so, because Antonelli has won everything in his rookie career. There's a good reason in his junior career. There's a good reason to believe that he could be a serious threat, and George has to be wary of that, because we know, and George knows full well, that Toto and Mercedes, if they could get Max, they would, no questions about it. They tried this year to get Max and George. That didn't happen. Antonelli was the logical replacement there from Hamilton. But let's say Antonelli does a good job as a rookie. You know, we're not expecting massive consistency out of Antonelli. And of course, it depends how good the car is. But on paper, Antonelli does a solid job. He will, I'm sure, have some spectacular weekends. He will have some spectacular weekends on the negative side, more than likely. And you'd think that George's consistency would be enough. But let's say on Antonelli's good weekends, he is as good as, if not faster than George. That puts Russell in a tricky spot, doesn't it? Because, then if Max is available and is willing to join, then there's potentially only one of those two drivers that becomes at risk. And even as Antonelli says, I've got no doubt that he's going to be keeping me on my toes next year. So, that's what Russell said on Antonelli. It wouldn't make too much sense the other way around, to be fair. Now, speaking of Mattia Binotto, he was, of course, the former team principal over there at Ferrari, and he was asked the question, would you have signed Hamilton, as Fred Vasseur has done, into the team? And I thought it was interesting, Binotto's response here, because, of course, he's no longer the team principal, potentially for good reason. And maybe this is one of the reasons why. What he says is logical, but I don't know if it's necessarily the right decision. So he says that if he was the TP, he would not have signed Hamilton, but Hamilton made a very good choice to go to Ferrari, he says. I agree with his decision, but he wouldn't have signed Hamilton if he was still in charge at Ferrari, because Ferrari was betting on other drivers, and if Leclerc is the talent, it's him that should have been led to the goal. So, interesting assessment, and I don't think he's wrong in some respects. Like, it makes sense to build around the talent of Leclerc. I think the reality is, and this is what Fred Vasseur saw as well, is that when Hamilton is available, it's kind of a no-brainer, I think, to get him, because he's not going to be around the team forever. Leclerc is still going to be at the team longer than Hamilton will, you would well imagine, unless something crazy happens. But, Leclerc is still the longer-term talent, but bringing Hamilton in brings some energy to the team, excites other engineers and top personnel to join Ferrari that want to work with Hamilton. Of course, shows they're a serious organisation on some level as well. Hamilton will bring his expertise and experience and ideas on how to create a winning team environment into Ferrari, will help Leclerc improve as well, I would say. Like, there's lots of benefits. The downside is you've got to pay him $150 million, whatever it is, like a serious bag they are shelling out for Lewis. But at the same time, I feel like it's almost a no-brainer from Vasseur. So, I get why Binotto would have a problem with it, but I think this kind of implies why Binotto has not been, or wasn't, in my opinion at least, as effective a team principal as Fred Vasseur is looking to be at Ferrari. Not like it's all sunshine and rainbows over there, as we full well know. It's not like their upgrade they brought in the early part of the season, Ferrari, actually worked as they intended it to. If it had done, Leclerc genuinely could be in this year's championship fight, but he's not. And that is unfortunate. Maybe next year they can be in either the hands of Hamilton or Leclerc, or possibly both. That will depend to some degree on how good the RB21 is. We know that the RB20 has fallen off a cliff, to be honest. It's the start of the season. There has been much speculation, and for good reason, as to why. And Christian Horner echoes Helmut Marko's words the other day on exactly why this might be, and referencing the wind tunnel that they have, the Cold War relic wind tunnel that they always talk about, right? So Christian Horner actually went into some detail on this, and look, his explanation makes some degree of sense. I will say that for the last several years, the theory has been, well, Red Bull have this old wind tunnel, but it's literally dominating the championships, so why does it matter? And then the argument was, well, Newey can see the air, so it doesn't matter. And maybe that's like more like reality than fiction, to be honest, that Newey had some, or still has, some sort of superpower, right? Because now Newey's departed, they're running into problems. And he says, we have always known there's been limitations of the tunnel, but I think as we have really started to push the aerodynamics of these cars now, and you're into the really fine margins, then the limitations show themselves up. So this might well be true, and it actually does make a bit of sense that the limitations were maybe not so much the case when you're working with cars that are not at the ceiling of the aerodynamic potential, but look, as bad as the RB20 is with respect to last year's RB19, it's actually a faster race car. It's just like they've not made the developments year on year that the other teams have. And, at the start of the year, it looked like they had, but clearly something went wrong there. So I'm not surprised if this is true, but as he says, it's been good enough to produce some fantastic cars, but it does have its limitations. And they say in terms of like temperature settings as well, that's where they find themselves having some issues. So will it hold back the RB21? Time will tell on how good next year's car is going to be, but actually Horner made it quite clear that it will be a straight up evolution, and this was inevitable anyway. Every team will find themselves in a pretty similar boat here, right? Because next year the goal really is 2026. You don't have all the time in the world to work on the 2025 car. So the theory for multiple of these teams was the first year's car and the second year's car were going to be quite similar. Then the third year's car, as in this year, is going to be more of a revolution. And then next year's car is more of an evolution of that one. So that's what Red Bull did. This year's car was a sizable step, what they believed was forward in some of their aerodynamic intentions. Clearly, some things failed, but they were quite radical in many ways, Red Bull, with this year's machine. And, next year they won't be able to commit as many resources they otherwise might have liked to, just because of the nature of the sport at the moment. Christian Horner's made it quite clear as well. There's been many senior staff leaving the team, and obviously Horner's going to say, well, it's no big deal, right? I mean, Newey's leaving, Wheatley's leaving. It's all fine. In an organisation, you're going to have evolution, but, clearly there's a bit more to it than that. And even Marco finally agrees with Horner on something and says that the organisation is currently being rearranged. So for good or for bad, I guess time will tell. But let's talk about the championship fight between these two. Good friends, but of course if it goes down to the wire in Abu Dhabi, it may get ugly, as it did a couple of years ago in the Verstappen-Hamilton title fight finale there. I mean, things were so heated that season. It's probably not going to get like that this year just because of the nature of the way this championship has gone. But nonetheless, Max Verstappen is the championship leader, but Lando Norris currently has the faster car. There are many reasons why Lando is in a difficult position to win the championship. The help or no help that Piastri may or may not give him, whether Norris can actually execute and deliver on weekends where required, Verstappen being able to handle a car which is very much still on a knife's edge and still deliver good performances and results with it. But Norris is absolutely convinced, and I think he's correct to say that he's not the favourite for the championship, right? On paper, he's 52 points behind. Yes, he's got the fastest car. There are 6 rounds, 3 sprints to go. But still, Max has got to be the favourite, given all the circumstances. So he's, I think, correct to paint himself as the underdog, but it's also like the way that people tend to do it when, trying to put the pressure on the other guy, basically. And Norris has a couple of reasons why Max has this advantage right now. Of course, one of it is the 52-point lead, but also he's been in these situations before, definitely helps. I mean, Norris has never been in a title fight before. Max has, and, well, he's only really won a single title fight, as it were, and whether he really won it, whatever, 2021 is a different story, you know what I mean? Obviously, he won the championship, but it was the last few races were not going in his favour. Then there was a bit of a battle in 2022 with Leclerc, but in the end, the Red Bull was the strongest car. Last year, there was no fight at all. But look, Max has won these championships before. He's been in title fights and title winning positions before. Norris hasn't. So as he says, like, he's aware of these type of situations, and it's helped him being in this position for the last 4 or 5 years. For me, it's still quite new. He also goes on to talk about the crash in Austria. I think you can kind of read, though, in between the lines here with Norris, why Max is so hard to beat, especially when he has a lead in a championship. Because as he says, Max is probably the hardest guy to race on track. He's the most aware in terms of situations. So, he doesn't say it outright, but I think you can kind of read between the lines here that Norris is kind of saying, well, if we were to come to blows on track and there was like a crash or an incident or something, there is only one driver who is favoured in that situation, and that is the driver in the lead of the championship, right? And we've seen this multiple times in the past. I mean, with Senna, with Schumacher, as in many famous images in Formula 1 past of championship battles. that end in a certain way simply because of the way that the title fight was being decided, right? When a crash or a contact or somebody scoring no points, or maybe both drivers scoring no points, that favours the guy in the lead. Even to some degree, you can give an example of, Monza 2021, when, Hamilton or Verstappen potentially could have yielded there. Neither of them did. Certainly Verstappen didn't, right? And we saw that, the whole season with Verstappen, there was no yielding pretty much going on at all. And, that defines the title fight that year. But this is the reason why for Norris, and maybe he really feels this way, that it's going to be so tough to beat Max, is because let's say Max is in the lead and Norris is trying to pass him, you have to make that pass incredibly clean. Because if you don't, if you're going wheel to wheel, if there's potential for contact, if you're sending a big lunge down the inside and contact happens, Max knows the situation. If you make contact with Max, if both of you get punctures, if both of you are out of the race, as was even the case way back in Austria, who does that favour? It's the championship leader. Now, if the driver involved, let's say Verstappen, were to get a penalty for causing a contact that ends the race of Norris, then obviously that's a big deal, but that's still 0 points for Norris at the end of the day. So we've seen these type of environments before. Schumacher most certainly, Senna of course back in the day as well. Like a lot of great champions have been in this position, and it's just why Max is so hard to beat. You can look at it from a pure perspective of, well, Lando has the fastest car. If he just wins and Max loses, or second or third of a race, Norris can still win the championship. But there will be occasions where by strategy, or maybe safety cars if they potentially make a return, Norris has to pass Verstappen for the lead of a race. And especially if it goes down to the wire in terms of the championship, that is going to be a seriously challenging thing to accomplish. Lando even goes on to say, as soon as I put the helmet on, I hate everyone. So we know that he gets on well with certain drivers off the track, but on the track it's a different story. I think the people you actually get along with more out of the track are the people you want to beat more, he says. And this is in that same interview to The Athletic. So pretty interesting how from not long ago we'd be talking about our Max and Lando great friends, and now Lando's saying, well, I hate Max, as I do with everyone when I put the helmet on, and the guys that I get along with outside of the track. And he might be right, Tate, the guys that you're friends with off the track, you want to beat them more because there's that kind of one-upmanship or whatever. But he certainly believes that's true in this current title fight. So very much intrigued to your thoughts as ever on all this stuff in the comment section below. Speaking of Max, you guys remember the drama during the Hungary Grand Prix weekends when Max was sim racing, like during the weekends, and the commentators were like, oh, I can't believe he'd stay up so late and sacrificing everything. And even Red Bull apparently then told him, like, look, you've got to calm it down here, Max, with all this sim racing stuff you're doing. He is back at it again, so Red Bull's ban on sim racing doesn't really seem to have done much, and he is going to be driving in the 23-hour race for mental health. So really cool to see it. It's great to see Max still supporting all of these causes. But yeah, maybe Red Bull will be happy, maybe they won't, maybe he's had to ask permission. I wouldn't bet on it, personally, that he has. But very much interested your thoughts, as ever, on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.